Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Tanisha Burford, and welcome back to our MURAP conference, a very timely and important conference on care in crisis. We had a very outstanding early morning session, and we also have an outstanding session that's forthcoming this afternoon with a keynote speaker. And so I'm really excited to be sort of moderating this session, and it's truly a pleasure and honor to introduce our keynote speaker for two reasons. The first reason is because of the powerful, transformative, kind, caring work that our keynote speaker, Monet, sort of presents. And second, I'm really excited to share space with Monet in our Durham community. I often see her at different events in the community, and she exhibits radical, sort of loving, humanistic presence. And so it's tremendously a pleasure to introduce Monet to our Mira community. So Monet Noel Marshall is an artist, director, playwright, curator, producer, and cultural organizer. A 2018 Independent Weekly Arts Award winner, she serves as the founding artistic director of Moja Performing Arts Company. Recent projects include Buy It, Call It, which is really exquisite and outstanding. And I found it really gratifying and affirming her piece on sort of by seeing us as art, our existence, our presence, our resistance as art, and seeing us as holy was really sort of powerful for me and all of the members in our community. So I truly enjoyed that work. So the recent projects include Buy It, Call It, performance installations, which earned her the 2018 Mary B. Reagan Community Artist Fellowship from the North Carolina Arts Council. Marshall is a 2020 recipient of the Emerging Artists Grant from the Durham Arts Council. Congratulations and well-deserved. You can learn more about her upcoming work, Monet at monetnoelmarshall.com. It is just an extreme pleasure to introduce you and to our community, and we are excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much for that warm and just like yummy, delicious introduction. I'm so grateful to also be in community with you and to all of you folks who are on the call. I really wish I could see your faces. So just like beam me your energy if you're that type of person, because I'm in my living room giving you this presentation we're going to do today. So I chose a topic of choosing yourself in the face of crisis. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we're gonna get right into it. One second. All right. Sorry, y'all. Here we go. All right. So choosing yourself in the face of crisis. If y'all see my text, it's fine. It's all good. So why this topic? Why now? As young people, as adults, y'all are adults, as adults in this moment, there are so many people who are going to be ready to pull energy from you, ask you questions around, what is this moment? Tell me what to do. How can we move? And honestly, this is both a new moment and it's not, right? Knowing that the history of oppression in our world and all of that is constant, right? There's nothing new in that. And people are going to try to pull our energy all the time, right? And there's something actually really revolutionary about deciding that even in the face of crisis, even in the face of big uprising, even in the face of pandemic, that we get to choose ourselves and choose our own health and choose our own wellness, knowing that in order for us to actually do our work, we have to be well, right? So that's why this topic, right? And in this time, I'm not going to spend very much time at all talking about the systems and all that. Like, we could have a whole nother session talking about the history and why we are here and all those things, but I trust that you know that. And we know what moment we're in, right? We know the stress that our bodies are under and that our spirits, our emotional selves, right? So right now, we're gonna just really think about the healing, right? And centering ourselves and what we need. And first, we wanna breathe. So I just wanna invite you to wherever you are, feel your feet on the ground, and just let your body rest for a moment and just be in this moment for breath, right? Not critiquing it, not doing anything different, just letting yourself feel the air in your body and be present. You know, I really do love doing sessions like this when I'm with people. So I'm trying to like feel our connection, even though we're apart. So I hope that you will engage in that with me. So I just want you to take a deep breath, hold it for a few seconds, and then release it. And do it again this time. Maybe breathe in for 4, hold for 4, and then out for 6. Okay. Yeah, let's get into it. So now I want to read you something. Beloved is one of the most important works that have come out of our country. So, I'm going to read you a section from that book, and I hope it close your eyes if you feel led. Just let the words wash over you. So in this section of the book, this story is about folks who are newly freed from slavery and they're building a new life. And in this section, Baby Suggs, who is an older Black woman, she talks about how slavery took everything, her body, just broke her body in so many ways, and that all she had left was her heart. So she would travel around as this unchurched preacher, giving messages and giving words to people with her heart. And in this moment, this is what she did. After situating herself on a huge flat-sided rock, Baby Suggs bowed her head and prayed silently. The company watched her from the trees. They knew she was ready when she put her stick down. Then she shouted, "Let the children come." And they ran from the trees toward her. "Let your mothers hear you laugh," she told them. And the woods rang. The adults looked on and could not help smiling. Then, "Let the grown men come," she shouted. They stepped out one by one from among the ringing trees. "Let your wives and your children see you dance," she told them, and the ground life shuddered under their feet. Finally, she called the women to her. "Cry," she told them, "for the living and the dead. Just cry." And without covering their eyes, the women let loose. It started that way. Laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Women stopped crying and danced. Men sat down and cried. Children danced. Women laughed. Children cried until, exhausted and riven, all and each lay about the clearing damp and gasping for breath. In the silence that followed, Baby Suggs, holy, offered up to them her great big heart. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or to go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were the blessed of the earth, its inheriting meek or its glory bound pure. She told them that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine, that if they could not see it, they would not have it. "Here," she said, "in this here place we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes. They just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You got to love it. You. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder, out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leave-ins instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and to dance, backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it, grace it, stroke it, and hold it up. And all your inside parts that they just as soon slop for hogs, you got to love them. The dark, dark liver, love it, love it. And the beat and beating heart. Love that too. More than eyes or feet, more than lungs that have yet to draw free air, more than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now. Love your heart, for this is the prize. Saying no more, she stood up then and danced with her twisted hip the rest of what her heart had to say, while the others opened their mouths and gave her the music. Long notes held until the four-part harmony was perfect enough for their deeply loved flesh. Thanks, Toni Morrison. So, yeah, I just love that section so very much. Okay. Wait, go back. So, in that section written by Toni Morrison, Baby Suggs lays out a blueprint on how to hold space for ourselves, how to find space to heal ourselves. And that is what I want to focus on today. So what she does is she gathers her trusted circle. She finds a clearing, a breathing space. She centers joy first. Then she asks us to move the feelings through their body. And then she makes space for grief. And that's what we're going to talk about. And this is Baby Suggs as played by Bea Richards in the movie, which you should see if you haven't seen it. Sorry, y'all. But first, we have to say no. In order for them to get to the clearing, in order for them to take the time they need for healing, they have to say no, right? Because again, in this story, these are newly freed folks from slavery, right? So they are working, they're trying to build their life out of nothing. And I'm sure there's always work to be done, always something, on top of still existing under this deep-rooted oppression that is just like shifted out of slavery less than 10 years ago, right? So they have to say no. They have to say no to everything that says like, oh, well, I don't have time. Well, I need to put this corn in the ground. Well, so-and-so is calling me. So they have to say no so that they can then take this time for themselves, remembering that no is a love word. So I want us to hold on to that in our present as well, that no is a love word. When we say no, we're actually creating a boundary so that we can hold ourselves and love ourselves better. And so the bottom is a piece of a poem from Nagira Waheed. No might make them angry, but it will make you free, right? And when we say no to others, that makes room for us to say yes to ourselves, right? So I want you, so one of the things that I really need during this presentation is please feel free to like drop comments and things in the chat, talk back to me. Yeah, I would love that. So I want you to think for yourself, like, what do you need to say no to so that you can say yes to yourself? And when you think about saying yes to yourself, what does that mean? Right? So for me, that means rest. For me, that means even in the midst of so many things that want to pull my attention, so many things that are important, I know what my work is. And I want to be able to say yes to my work, right? And Beyonce says, if we're going to heal, let it be glorious. And in order for us to do that healing work, we have to say no to things that are not ours and yes to ourselves so we can begin this process of healing. So step one, we want to gather our people. So for some of y'all, like you may have your people and that's awesome. Like people who call you higher, people that you know you can be yourselves with. And for others, like you may still be trying to figure it out. Also understanding that as your life circumstances shift, your people might also shift if they're not also growing and elevating as well, right? And that's no love lost. It's okay. That happens. So, how to identify your people? Your people will hold space for all that is you, right? All your feelings, your complexities, your messiness, your glory. They will be there to celebrate with you. They're down. They're just down. You know, these are the people that you want to take into your clearing, into your healing space, because you can't do that work with everyone. And also, you know, there's this idea around like our circles of influence and our rings, like who's in your center? You may have folks at ring 4 that you're like, oh, I really like to party with you, but you're not necessarily the person I'm going to process my feelings with. And that's okay. We don't have to be everything for everyone. That's the beauty in community and the beauty in this web of relationship, right? They're going to encourage your growth. If you have people who you think are your people, but they're not encouraging you to be your best self, they're probably not your people, right? And also naming that, you know, we all have birth families and our birth families may be our people and they may not be. And that's okay too. And then lastly, like, well, not lastly, there's lots of things to look for in your people, but third, they're going to hold you accountable, right? So what does that mean? That means that when you are exhibiting behavior that they know is not part of your highest good, they're going to call you out on it with love. They're going to let you know because they do want you to grow. They don't want you to be stuck, and they want you to do the same thing for them too. They want you to call them into loving accountability, right? And that's so important to have relationships that are strong enough and trusted enough for people to be like, I know you said that you wanted to stop doing this thing, but you're still doing it. How can I support you in making a better decision for yourself, right? Which is also very different from people trying to make you become something that they want you to become, right? Versus what you've named that you want to be. So that's an important distinction. 2, you're gonna find a breathing space. So we have, I don't know about y'all, but in my time of like facilitating spaces, you know, a safe space was a thing. Like, this is a safe space. This is a safe space. And it's impossible for us to actually create safe space in this country. Like, this is like a permanently, like, if you walk into this space, it's always safe. Because we live in a country that's built on stolen indigenous lands, built by the labor of stolen people, which means that on top of all the oppression and injustices that have happened to people of color and to women and to trans folks and to queer folks and to folks with disabilities and immigrants across the history of this nation, right? Which means that this danger, this oppression is baked into the ground, right? So what can be a safe space sometimes may not be a safe space other times, right? So what we want is a breathing space, knowing that it's not actually the physical land that necessarily makes it safe, but it's who we gather with. It's the intention we come to the space with that actually makes it possible for us to like relax our bodies enough to breathe, right? So you want to find a breathing space. And that space may be different from day to day, week to week, semester to semester, right? And you want to identify those places to go when it's hard, when you're having a moment, when you need to let it out, when you need to talk, because we know you can't do that everywhere, right? And then I want you to breathe. Like really breathe, like deep in your belly, breathe. So as I was working on this presentation and in the work that I've done around holding space and all of that for years, there is a tendency for us to know that something is true in our bodies, but we don't actually want to hold it as truth until someone with some credentials says it's true, right? And as folks who are going into higher education, academia, it's important. Research is important, right? It's so important. And I am so grateful for all the people who do research that allows me to have better context for my life and for my experience, and also inform me about other people's lives and experience. And I come from a grandmother and I come from a mother who grew up on a sharecropping tobacco farm, who's neither one of her parents graduated high school. And in our bodies, in our bones, particularly for those of us who come from communities of color or queer and trans folks, like in our close ancestry, there are people who probably did not have the same access to formal education, and yet they were genius. They were and are brilliant, right? Even though they couldn't cite their sources, right? So I'm saying all that to say that breathing is important technology, and it's ancient technology. Now, I could link you to the Harvard blog post, the blog post from Harvard to tell you the benefits of breathing and of breath, but I want you to trust your own body and like take that as a primary source as well, right? And the knowing of your people, whoever your people are, all had a relationship to breath and to breathing and to so many of the other things we're going to talk about in this presentation. So we can be in the both and. We can both say like, thanks Harvard for giving us this information, and my grandma Ben knew that, right? Right, okay. So we want to activate breath whenever possible, knowing that when we take a deep breath, it lets our body know that we're resting. When we breathe slowly, it lets our body like relax. It helps us support our vagus nerve, which is like this communication highway in our body, which sends out communication to our heart and our gut and all the things. It just like connects all of our center, right? And it just helps us to decrease stress. So anytime that you find yourself in a position where you're experiencing stress, or I really don't like this word, but a microaggression, just aggression, it's just oppression, and your body is having a response, remember that your first breathing space is your body, and you can always return to your breath, okay? So why did baby Shug's call the children first? Why? I want you to sit with that question for a moment. You know, for those of us who have children in our lives, and all of us were children at some point, I mean, unless, I don't know, there's no unless, you were a child at some point, right? And when we are children, we have such a much more access to our emotional state and to our emotions, because like the world hasn't done the thing of telling us who and what we should be and like taught us how to contort. So I think when Baby Shug's calls the children first, it is also a call to our inner child to lean into that, right? To lean into play, to center that, to let ourselves have that, even in the face of the things that feel like we should not be experiencing joy in this, right? For those of you who are sci-fi fans who've read books by Octavia Butler, particularly like Parable the Sower, which is It's a post-apocalyptic, but feels a lot like now story. One of the things that happens a lot is like pleasure, like sexual pleasure is centered. So even as these people are in the midst of climate collapse and complete like government fascism and oppression, they are still choosing to find time for pleasure, right? And I think that's also what Baby Chooks is doing in this moment. And what she says is let your parents, let your family hear you laugh, knowing that the laughter of the children will remind everyone else in the community that laughter is still possible, right? So we get to center joy. We get to center joy. And I hope that like you are thinking about like, how do you center joy in your life? You know, and what are the things that, you know, that you do that are silly or fun that you just use to decompress from your day and from your life, whether it's school stress or, you know, money stress or stress from pandemics or social uprising. What are you doing to center your joy? Yeah, what are you doing? And have that list so that you know you can go back to it. Also share it with your people so that when you're having a hard time, they can ask you like, oh, but have you read any comics lately? Did you play any video games? Did you laugh? Did you watch something funny? Did you dance? Like they can ask you these things to remind you of what's on your list of joy. Also, I really like that photo. Okay, so next, movement in the body. So the body knows, right? The body intuitively wants to heal itself, right? So we're gonna, unless we fight it, our body is gonna find the ways and the things it needs to heal, right? The body holds so much knowledge, and not just the knowledge of like what we've experienced in our lifetimes, but from other lifetimes as well. And that's epigenetics. So this may be a word that you're completely familiar with, or maybe it's not. But epigenetics is this, particularly in the idea of human behavior and psychology, is this idea that like what our grandparents, our parents, our ancestors experienced, that those things, they just slightly, they impact our genetics so that we have behaviors that we didn't choose. There are things that we did not experience, but we're still carrying the memory of that in our bodies. So for instance, some scientists believe that during prehistoric times, that big birds would come and like snatch up little children and like put their talons, like, this is kind of gross, y'all, but I'm a science nerd a little bit. So put their talons like inside the eyes and like scoop a child up. That's gross and wild. And because of that, even now today, like when a plane goes over by or there's like a shadow that goes over, like instinctively we have like our bodies are going to tingle just a little bit, give us some kind of information to like, ooh, watch out, from thousands of years ago, right? So if that's happening from thousands of years ago, imagine the impact of if you are the ancestor of someone who was enslaved, or you are the they're either descendant. You are the descendant of someone who was enslaved. You are the descendant of someone who faced mass genocide and displacement from the U.S. coming and stealing in like native indigenous land, right? So all of those things that happen impact us because our bodies, they only want to survive. They want us to continue into the future. So they want to give us information so that we can do so. But the good thing is, it's not just negative or like bad things that impact us. We also have not just the generational trauma, but it's also the generational wealth, right? Or the generational inheritance of knowing of resilience and of how to survive. So there's that too. Are we gonna talk about butterflies? Yes, we are. Okay, so I'm kind of obsessed with butterflies. And so they did another thing about epigenetics. They did a study where they exposed these caterpillars to like this smell, this stinky smell, And then when the caterpillar became a butterfly and exposed the smell, the butterfly still remembered and was adverse to that smell. But then they've also done it where they've exposed it to the next generation that never even smelled the initial smell, and they still had this adverse reaction. They've also done this with mice and other things as well, which is to say and to show that it's not just a human thing. Like, this is a biological technology of how do we pass on information beyond oral tradition or written word or like things like that. Which then means that we are still experiencing our own trauma in this life. So while we're also dealing with our descendant trauma, our generational resilience, we're also experiencing it in our daily life, right? And we don't really want to pass that on. You know, we want to find a way to heal some of it so that we can pass on the message without passing on the trauma, right? So one of the ways that we can do that is moving it through our body, using movement to actually unlock and to heal ourselves, like to actually heal ourselves. Like these very fly children. And you know, the other thing about particularly dancing and dancing in groups is that it also is a connection to community, right? So by being in time with one another, so similar to Baby Shugs in Beloved, by being in time with one another, we know that we are also not experiencing this by ourselves. We're not moving it through by ourselves, and we can be in the practice of collective healing. And I know that in this moment of shelter in place and social distance, being together is really difficult. And wonder if there are ways that we can practice for the world that's coming, for the world in which we get to be together again, right? How can we have our Zoom dance parties, you know, like D-Nice and Club Quarantine, right? Like that is actually a way for us to heal together. And then making space for grief. So grief is a hard one, right? Our world does not necessarily give us the tools in which to practice, to work through our grief, because it takes time, it's nonlinear, it's circuitous, right? That something can come up and then we're grieving the thing that happened 7 years ago. And that is not in line with our very linear, straightforward, this is a step and then you move on, you move on, you move on. Our world, it's just not in line with that. It's not in line with capitalism either, right? And because of that, we as a society are not very good at dealing with grief. But we have to make space for it, right? We have to take the time to acknowledge, like, ooh, like I lost something. And I miss it. I'm mourning it. You know, we just have to. So when we are grieving, the question underneath grief is like, what is the loss? So I'll say for myself, I've been grieving what I thought this year would be, right? I'm grieving the shows that I was supposed to do. I'm grieving the weddings I was supposed to go to. Some folks who got married, but we couldn't go to the wedding, or folks who didn't get married at all. I'm grieving the projects and the ways of being. I'm grieving a 2020 summer of like barbecues and hanging out and like hearing Will Smith's Summertime on a car as I drive by. Like, you know, I'm missing that. I'm missing these touchstones of what I'm used to having that let me know I'm going through another year. On top of the collective grief of all the people who have lost their lives to the pandemic, the people who have lost their lives to sanctioned white supremacist violence, grieving the fact that there are still children in cages and families that are being separated because we created some fake lines in the ground. Yeah, it's a lot to steal and remix off Solange. Like, it's a lot to be sad about, you know? And in order for us not to metabolize that grief and just stick it down into our bodies, we have to have a practice to move through it, you know? So I hope that you'll start to make a list and figure out like what is that for you? So some ways to work through grief, some ways to practice is like one, just naming the feeling, you know. And I think there's something where, particularly with grief, we like to intellectualize it, where we want to just keep it in our head and not actually feel it, but actually like naming and being with the feeling and doing that with your people, doing that with the people you trust, the people that'll hold you, the people that won't say like, oh, well, you know, you have nothing to be sad about, or it could be worse. It's like, yeah, that's true. It could be worse. And I still get to be in my own grief and in my own feelings. Another one is building an altar. So I would turn the camera around later and show y'all my altar, but I'm looking at it right now, and I have photos of my grandmother who passed away in 2017, my cousin Michael who also died, 2018, my cousin 2017, wow, yeah. My cousin Michael who also passed away in 2017, and my grandfather who passed away in like 2015. And I have mementos to them on my altar. And the altar, you know, for folks, whether it doesn't even have to be religious, like in lots of different cultures have their own altar practices. But part of that is like, I want a physical manifestation to like look at and be with those feelings, right? Outside of myself. So like in, you know, Coco, they had the ofrenda. So it's very similar. Like this is a place that I'm going to honor these people who are lost and to be with this grief, right? And to know that like grief is going to be here anyway. So let me find a place to put it and to be with it. And then crying. Yo, crying is magic. That's not a scientific statement. Crying, the scientific statement is that we cry when we and our emotions are beyond our own capacity. So we have like a window of our emotional capacity. And when we're getting close to the top, we will cry so that we can release like the stress hormones so that we can get back in our window of acceptable, like what our bodies can handle, right? And that happens with happiness. It can happen with sadness, it can happen with excitement. Just our body's just going to regulate. And that's what crying is. And we have to let ourselves have it so that we can like regulate in that way. And yeah, just let yourself cry without shame, because our world also tells us that like if we cry there's something wrong with us. So just release that and let yourself cry. And then, so this is another, back to a piece of the section I read earlier. It started that way, laughing children, dancing men, crying women, and then it got mixed up. Knowing that even as I'm talking about this Baby Shook's blueprint and all these different ways to deal with these different things, that they're all mixed up, right? So we can be grieving and we can choose to dance out the grief. We can, you know, be feeling our feelings. Instead, we need to sit and like meditate. We need to be with it. We can, so all of these different technologies of breathing and crying and moving, all of those are all things that we can pull on to support ourselves in this moment. And it's important for us to do that because, again, there are so many people who are going to try to tell us how we need to respond and what we need to be doing with our time and with our energy. And we just can't let them. We just can't let them. We just cannot. Because white supremacist, capitalist, heteronormative culture will tell us that we need to be producing, we need to be doing, we need to be moving, we need to be going. And that's just not sustainable. Like everything else in nature has a season, right? We have to let ourselves be in our season. And we also have to give ourselves permission to rest, to feel, to be, to think, to dream, we have to do it. We have to do it. And as people who are going into academia, particularly from communities that have been historically pushed aside and ignored. There will be a feeling of wanting to overperform to show other people that you deserve to be here. And I really want you to like release that. Like just like brush it off and let it go. Because what happens then is that those same systems will eat us up and use up every ounce of our brilliance. Meanwhile, we're sick and unhealthy and not experiencing joy because we're so busy trying to prove something to a system that doesn't care about our humanity, right? So I want you to learn that lesson now, and I want you to hold on to it because it's so important. And you know why you are here. Like everything in the universe has a purpose. The universe ain't never make nothing that it didn't need. Everything has a purpose. You have a purpose, but your purpose is not to prove yourself to systems that were never meant to support you. Yeah? Okay. You deserve to choose you. You deserve to hold on to you for yourself. You deserve to take time. You deserve to be with your people. You deserve to rest in the middle of the day just because you want to. You deserve to take a nap. You deserve to like just sit and look out the window. And particularly for those of us who come from people whose lives and labor and genius has been stolen in one way or another, it's actually, that's resistance. It's a revolutionary act. Because we're not only doing that work for ourselves, we're doing that work for our ancestors who could not, right? Yeah, and I just want to affirm you in that. I just want to affirm that you know what you need, that anytime someone tells you you have to do something, that you get to be in your knowing of your own body to know if that's true, that you get to make a different choice. You get to say no. You get to go back and say no after you said yes. There may be consequences, but you get to choose yourself in that, right? And that is the way that we can transform these systems and transform these spaces that were not built for us in mind. That's how we make it a safer, make more breathing spaces for the folks that are coming after us, is by telling the truth and then by modeling it, right? By walking away when something doesn't feel right. Here's a pro tip. If you don't take nothing else, if something is happening to you and you don't like it, it doesn't feel good, go to the bathroom. No one will ever stop you from going to the bathroom. And if they do, right? You get to center yourself, because at the end of the day, after you've metabolized all that harm and you've taken in all that harm, they're also not invested in your healing. So find your people and gather them. Find a breathing space. Center your joy. Move it through your body. And then be in your grief. Let the grief move. And then mix it up. Whatever you need next. More breathing, more grieving, more movement, more laughter, more joy, whatever you need. Okay? Okay. And now we have time for some questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yay.
So just to everyone, thank you so much that your talk was transcendent and powerful and abundant. There's just so much. I felt like I was at church. I haven't been in church in a while. It felt deeply spiritual. There's just so much to take away from it. But I think one of the things I really resonated with, and as a scientist whose work sort of relates to that, is radical breathing, right? I think it was so powerful. And so I can't wait for you all to engage with Monet. So I will. So please use the raise hand function if you have questions, and I will sort of identify you and then allow you to encourage you to ask your question.
Yeah, y'all, ask some questions, bro. So I'm just gonna be humble.
Or reflect.
Or reflections, comments.
Or just amen.
Oh yeah, so we have a question. How do you find a safe space on tarnished land? For example, my university was built by slaves. We have slave grave sites next to dorms. How can you find a safe space with constant reminders of trauma? That is such a good question. That is such a good question. So y'all are all UNC students. So a little bit about me. I didn't go to UNC. I went to A&T, Aggie Pride. But I worked at UNC for several years. I worked at Playmakers, which is next to that one of the grave sites for enslaved folks. So I want to name that one. That's such a real experience. And also, I think part of so the other thing that I do is I also do a lot of work around slavery with my theater company. So we've been doing for the last 6 years, leading folks through a experience where they start off being sold into slavery, and then they go through the space as an enslaved person, and then they try to escape together. Also, the space that they're doing this on was an actual plantation, like the original plantation owner's house is standing, but it's now a historic site in Raleigh. It's called MURAP Historic Park. One of the things that has shifted my relationship to this tarnished land, to those constant reminders of trauma that when you look, they are everywhere. You know, it's like that spot on the painting, like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Is that I know and trust I'm living my life in right relationship to those people and their history and their memory, right? And I think that, and I believe that we can do that even if that's not our ancestral lineage. So how do we do that? You know, we speak truth to power when we have the energy to do that. We are loving and kind to folks, particularly like folks of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks. We on, like when people are, we speak up when we can, we rest when we can, we take care of our bodies. We also we become breathing spaces for those folks who maybe those reminders are hitting closer to home in the ways that we can. In other words, like we are not going to sit silently by and do things that are actually antithetical to the memory and the lives of these people that built your school, right? So that's one of the things that I would say is like, are we living in accordance? Are we living in a way that honors the memory and labor of these folks, right? And also like us being in our freedom, particularly for those of us who are Black folks, Indigenous folks, folks of color, queer and trans folks, like us being in our freedom honors the memory of those people who could not live fully free, right? So, and then if you're feeling called and led, you know, even if you're walking by, just saying thank you. If you're walking by the gravesite, just say like, thank you so much, you know, and just being in a position of gratitude, knowing that it's not just the people with statues and not just the people whose names are on the building that deserve to be honored. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay, wonderful question and really super helpful and powerful response. We have a question from Tyler.
Oh, awesome. Do you mind if is it cool if I just talk?
Certainly.
Okay, awesome. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for this workshop. I loved it. And I loved like the continual use of Toni Morrison. And I absolutely love her and have really come to understand like the power of her literature as resistance in itself. And obviously you very well like documented that. The question I have for you is both kind of a comment and something I'm trying to explore as well. But I think the thing that makes her so amazing was that she was able to create entire worlds that were authentically correct and accurate based in history. But it was like a different story that we had not heard. And the concept of whiteness like almost did not exist. Like it wasn't thought of, it wasn't taught. So what kind of advice can you give to folks who are trying to decolonize, to actually enact that and manifest that in their everyday life? And not only just like being in non-white spaces, because even being in non-white spaces, coloniality still exists and you can still be colonized amongst people that are not white and do not look colonial. But how do you practice that? And like, what has been your exploration with that?
Ooh, that's such a good question, Tyler. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about like recently, my recent feelings about that. Because I think one is like, in that grief, there's also a sweetness and forgiveness around like, ooh, I have to forgive myself for the ways that I was acting from a colonized place before, you know? So one of the things I've recognized about myself, particularly in this moment of COVID, and as so many things, particularly like the theater, Broadway industry is shut down, it's that I have had to decolonize my dreams, decolonize my desires, and take that away from whiteness. So what I mean by that is going to school, getting a theater degree, even at HBCU, Broadway is still the pinnacle. Like if you act on Broadway, if you get to Broadway, you've made it, right? But what does that actually mean if Broadway is still a function of whiteness in which certain stories get told, certain stories are elevated, and most of the people, because of the cost and the location, most people who look like me, who are my people, will not be able to get there? Like, what does that actually mean for my art practice? And why then are my dreams and my desires tied up into what whiteness has told us is excellent? So first and foremost, I think one way I've done that in my work, and that I'm finding so much more, I've already was kind of doing it, not realizing, even the fact that like, so I'm from Long Island, New York originally. I've spent pretty much my whole adulthood here in North Carolina from A&T, and then living here in Durham. People be like, well, why don't you like being a big fish in a small pond? Well, if you really wanted to do it, you should go to New York, you should go to LA, you should go to, and I'm like, but my people are here. My mama's here. Like, this is my ancestral land. Like, this is my ancestral home. Like, on both sides of my family, they come back to North Carolina. Like, I'm actually choosing that, like, to be here, and that my gifts, I want to give my gifts to this place and to these people, right? But actually, success for me is not my proximity to whiteness, right? So I think that's one of the ways that like really helps me, because then not only once I see it for myself, then I can acknowledge it and see how it's playing out with other people. So, and then for me also, the other way that I feel I do this work is like, okay, where am I going to put my grace? So like Black grace has been weaponized. We can name that around like every time there's some harm against a Black person that's enacted by a white person or folks of the state, it's like, you should forgive them. You should forgive them. And I just, if I'm going to use my grace, which my grace has a finite pool, I'm going to give that grace to other folks who are existing under this oppression, and that their dreams, their behaviors, their wants, the ways they move through the world has been impacted by racialized oppression, right? So that then allows me to be in spaces, even if they're non-white, and I see colonial behaviors or coloniality, I love that word, acted out, that I'm like, ooh, okay, I see that. And I can be in a different type of choice around like how I want to engage with these people and how I want to engage with this space. And sometimes I'm gonna have the energy to do it, and sometimes I'm not. And that's okay. I also have to trust that there are other people doing this work that like, even if we're just like, oh, I can bring you in a little bit, and someone else is gonna bring you in some more. I'm gonna be in this space, I'm gonna bring this space a step closer, and then someone else is gonna do more of that work, then that's okay. And that I don't have to martyr myself in that endeavor. Yeah. Thanks, Tyler.
Again, thank you. Important question, beautiful answers, human answers. And so we have 2 additional questions, and we're getting close to the conclusion of this session. So what I'd like to do is for both Chloe and Eden to ask their questions. So you could ask your question verbally, and then for Monet to respond to that, and we can sort of close our session there.
And we also have one in the Zoom chat from Sophia. Had a question from earlier, so I just want to name that.
Alrighty, so let's see if we could try to take all of those and end in the next 8 minutes or so. Thank you. So go ahead, Chloe, first with your question, and then Eden, and then Sophia, I'll read your question.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really peace-giving, which I really appreciate. My question kind of centers on theater as an art form. I go to Spelman, and I am a theater and English double major there. And I wanted to ask about how you, in your art, center the piece that you were talking about and the message that Baby Sugg sends, without being weighed down by kind of, at least in my art, I feel the need to share a message that hasn't already been shared, and not being weighed down by like the pressures of the industry and the need to share a specific message in your art. I'm not sure if that makes sense, so that's my question. And thank you so much.
I think it does. And if it doesn't, just hit in the chat of like, I answered it or it didn't. And we can also have further question later if you want to email me or anything like that. So, you know, that is such an age-old question, right? So that for me goes back to like the debate during the 1920s between Alain Locke and W.B. Du Bois of like, is Black art for propaganda? We make it art for art's sake, right? So I think that part of the glory of being a Black artist, or for me being a Black artist, and is that like I get to decide like, oh, I really want y'all to walk away with this message, and also I want to show you the glory of who we are when we are just being, right? And I think the other thing that helps that is like, who am I centering in this audience, right? So if for me, my artistic center is Black women and queer Black folks, queer and trans Black folks. So if that's the case, like, I don't actually need to explain to you what it's like to be Black, you know, because like you're living it. And that's cool. Some artists have a different center. Like their work is specifically like, oh, I want to teach these people who don't know about our history. Cool. That's not my center, right? And I think that choosing ourselves also means choosing the path that actually makes us light up. It doesn't make me light up artistically to center whiteness or to center those who do not know. It lights me up to think about creating work that I was telling someone recently that like I want to rewrite my resume and only put things that older Black women have said about my work, because that's actually the opinions that I hold most highly, you know, because they're my center. I want you to see yourself. I want you to feel seen. I want you to laugh. I want you to be like, ooh, I want you to feel a little scandalized. I want to give you a message or something that maybe you didn't think of before. And then for me, that just feels juicier. I don't know. Does that answer your question? I hope it does. Yeah.
And next, let's have a question from Eden.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying I really appreciated your talk. Everything you said really resonated with me deeply and brought me peace. And so thank you for that. And so, yeah, kind of just like as the pandemic has ensued, I've had a lot more time to do some introspection, and I've come to find out that my mind has been deeply infected by this capitalistic sense of productivity. And I find myself thinking about the things I need to do and not the things I want to do. All of the time. And so I've had an interesting relationship with trying to meditate and take more time to be intentional about where I'm spending my energy. And so I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe some meditative practices that you do every day to sort of find energy every day to just live.
Absolutely. So one, I want to be real honest that I really love meditation and I'm horrible at doing it every day. So let's just name I'm a human being and every day is a thing. So I really just like, I love to sit and like, there's a couple folks on YouTube that I listen to, like Faith Hunter has like a 30-day meditation. I like to sit and just listen. Sometimes I like to do a thing like a body scan where I'll start with my feet and just either just like feel my body all the way up. And if you YouTube like body scan meditation, there are guided meditations that will help with that. And then I also want to name that there are things that our people, our ancestors, our grandmothers and grandfathers and uncles and aunties have been doing that were meditative that they would not call meditation. So for instance, like my grandma Zelma, like if she was cooking, you didn't really stay in her kitchen while you were cooking. And for some folks, like that was the time when they could just be quiet and just move their hands. So during this pandemic, like cooking has been a meditative act for me. For some people, like I have a friend who, when they wash dishes, it's like, I'm gonna wash these dishes and I'm just gonna be quiet. I'm gonna quiet my mind, right? So also knowing that it doesn't have to look like one certain thing, and it can also, you can add meditation to a thing you're already doing, right? So check out YouTube. Also, Spotify has some really great meditations. Whale sounds, y'all. Just go on YouTube and listen to the whale sounds playlist. I know that sounds very weird, but whale sounds will just make you feel like so, I don't know, there's just something really beautiful and big about it. Listen to some whale sounds. It feels good. And then put some meditation into the things you're already doing. Yeah.
Final question. And then we'll end in 2 minutes so we can start our next session, which starts at 3:30, which is vulnerability in crisis. So our next final question is, what happens when our research is tied to our trauma, or personal trauma, or family's trauma, or ancestors' trauma, and our community's trauma? What can we do to grapple with the idea that doing research in ourselves as a form of love for ourselves and others, but also a reminder of pain?
Such a good question, Sophia. I think I want to circle back to the centering and the why. There's a few things. So one, again, have your people. You want to build up your emotional armor, because there will be people who are committed to misunderstanding you, right? You can have all the receipts and they will be like, you know? So you want to have your emotional armor, whatever that looks like for you, and to have your why, and keep asking yourself why. Like, okay, I'm gonna do this work, I'm gonna do this research, but we know that the research isn't the end goal, right? Why do you want to do this research? Do you want to do it so that, you know, so that children you can find a way to flip this information and give it to children so they don't have to wait until they're in grad school to know it? Are you wanting to, like, how do you want to actually get this to the people, right? And I think if you can find ways to create your why and turn it into a mantra of, like, so for me, it might be, I create art to create space for Black folks, right? You like creating that and just having that for yourself, so that even when people try to like test your gangster and like mess with you and like dig the knife into all your sore spots, you can come back to that. Having groups like this of folks that you can go back to and be like, whoo, this is hard. These systems are trying me. Can we talk about it? Like using those resources, tapping into your elders, the folks that, you know, whether they are living and you can talk to them, or whether they are gone, like who are the folks in your research lineage, does that make sense? In your scholastic lineage that have been doing this work, been saying these things, that can also be really helpful. And yeah, what else? And then I think when you need to take a break, take a break. Like, because it does hurt. Oh, also therapy, y'all. If you don't have a therapist, find one. Particularly someone that has some type of mirroring to your identity, or at least they have language around like oppression or queerness, transness, race. Like, get that now, and build a relationship with the therapist. Yeah, and then have your joy practice on lock. What are the things, what are the albums, you know, you can turn on? Like, whether you're a trap music, like I need to like trap it out on my way to class, or whether you're like, I'm listening to this jazz and calm myself, or like whatever you watch on TV, maybe you're like, whatever you need, like have that. Like just build your armor, build your layers, like build what you need to take care of yourself, right? Yeah, I hope that's helpful, Sophia. Thanks so much for that question. And thanks, y'all, so much for this time. I really appreciate it. And feel free to contact me. Yes, I will be willing to share my email with the group. My email is Monet, MONET, .marshall@gmail.com. My website is monetnoelmarshall.com. I'm on Instagram at monetisart. And you can also find me on Facebook. So please Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm glad. I hope it was peaceful.
Again, thank you for such a transcendent and spiritual talk, and reminding us that self-care is indeed revolutionary, and it's one of the kindest things that we can do to ourselves or for ourselves. And please stay in contact and follow her on all social media. She's just a wonderful presence in person, and we're so grateful for you and for you sharing with us and feeding us today. All right, that's it for, I think I'm gonna just hand that over back to Benita. Do you have any other announcements that I missed? If that's it, I think I've covered the announcement that our next session begins at 3:30, which is also going to be as powerful. And so we'll see you there at 3:30. Thank you so much, and enjoy your break. Thank you, Monet.